Oh, Canada, what have you done? Who is the world's fourth largest military spender behind the US, Russia, and China? And who started all the fires in Israel this week? We're going to look at all these questions and more on today's Trumpet World. Back when we first started talking about the Canadian election, it looked like a shoo-in for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. Now, a few months later, Mark Carney and the Liberals just won the vote in Canada. So to help us understand what is going on and why there was such a big change, we'll go to our correspondent for the English-speaking world, Andrew Miller.
Yeah, it was quite a dramatic change actually in Canada's political fortunes. The election was actually fairly close. Only about 43.7% of Canadians voted for Mark Carney, with the second place candidate, the Conservative candidate, getting about 41.3%. So both in the low 40s in terms of percentage points, but the way the political system works there, that 43%, it's not a majority, but it's more than any other candidate. So Mark Carney was able to form a minority government. It's not going to be a hugely stable government just because it doesn't have a popular mandate. Probably the most popular theory as to why that surge took place is actually due to deteriorating relationships between Canada and the United States, or Canada and the Trump administration in particular. Donald Trump, he announced tariffs on Canada and started referring to Justin Trudeau as Governor Trudeau, and Canada as the 51st state. And this tactic seemed to have worked really well at getting Justin Trudeau to resign. But then when Trump continued to talk this way and continued to do the tariffs, it seemed that Mark Carney was able to position himself much better as the anti-Trump candidate. And so Canadians elected him largely on the idea that he is going to be the candidate who stands up against Donald Trump. And actually, for further proof of that, I've brought a sound clip with us. This is Mark Carney's victory speech, and you can, right towards the beginning, you can see what he thinks is the most popular issue for Canadians at the time.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed.
Yeah, so you heard in that clip right there, he's talking very much about America trying to break Canada with economic war, and how he feels that his mandate is to stand up against the United States. So it seemed kind of like a one-issue election in a lot of ways, with the primary talking points being like who can stand up against Donald Trump being the issue that's turned enough Canadians against the Conservative Party to swing this election in a way that many people didn't think it would go just 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, I think this is quite a surprising election in many ways, where Justin Trudeau was pretty disastrous for Canada. And you look at the opinion polls, and quite clearly a lot of Canadians think so. And yet a lot of those Canadians turned around and voted for Mark Carney. And part of that, I think, reflects the success Mark Carney had in putting distance between himself and Justin Trudeau. But that it also, I think, is just remarkable how much Canadians dislike Donald Trump. That not just that they're a little bit needled by some of his comments, but they will embrace someone that's going to continue the same self-destructive policies that they have experienced for the last several years, purely because they think that person will stick it to Donald Trump.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of what I'd consider like unhinged emotion in this election, because yes, Donald Trump has been making a lot of jokes and comments about the 51st state, but no one seriously thinks that he's going to invade Canada or anything like that to become the 51st state. So for Mark Carney to get up on his acceptance speech saying that, like, I am the one who will defend Canada's lakes and rivers and trees and other things from Donald Trump's aggression. It's like, no one needs you to defend Canada from the United States. The only way you become the 51st state is for a majority of Canadians to vote for that. They can decide that for themselves. So this is really a non-issue. The tariffs are a real issue that I could see Canadians being concerned about. However, it's an issue they have no control over, whether America imposes a tariff on them or not. And so their leaders, they're going to have to sit down and negotiate with Donald Trump. I think one of the most logical responses I heard from a Canadian leader was actually from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who said, she said, I've taken the time to talk to people close to Trump to kind of psychoanalyze him. They said he likes to look strong. He likes a win. So he's like, if we can compromise with him on border security or defending the Arctic from the Russians or something else that America wants, we can negotiate better tariff terms. We said, but that's the way, if you're actually logically looking at this, like, okay, how does Canada get better tariff terms from the United States? The answer is not to do like Doug Ford did or Mark Carney did. They said, well, we're going to propose retaliatory tariffs that are going to hurt Americans as much as possible. It's like, if you directly challenge Trump, he's not going to back down. And Canada doesn't have the economic heft to force America into a position. So I guess the main point here is, like, you're seeing definitely a lot of emotion that's splitting these countries apart, that's not really backed by any facts or logic or what's the best way forward here.
I mean, emotion splitting the nations apart is a major problem. This is one of the points we made on one of our On Location in Canada shows a couple of months ago, that division internally within our nations is a curse, but division between Britain and America, Britain and Canada, Canada and America, this is a curse. That these countries, as Herbert W. Armstrong shows in his book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, these countries are all descended from Israel, and that doesn't necessarily mean that God wants them all to be one nation, but division, infighting between the two of them historically caused these countries a huge amount of weakness, and today causes a huge amount of weakness. And I think you can see where Donald Trump has caused some of that division. You can see where the Canadian media has caused a lot of that division. I think one of the things that's fascinating to me is, in most countries, the younger you are, the further left you are. Whereas, at least in Canada, it's the older people are, the more anti-Trump they are. I mean, we were talking about this during the week. You pointed out that, well, then the older people are, the more likely they are to get most of their news from TV news. And I think it shows the steady diet of propaganda that has been fed, and I think that's to blame for a lot of the division. But this division is a curse, and it's going to hurt both countries. And I think one way that you've highlighted, that Mr. Blondeau, our kind of Canadian correspondent, has highlighted, is Mark Carney's ties to the EU. I mean, this is kind of why I'm a bit annoyed about Mark Carney running even into politics, because I'm pretty familiar with Mark Carney because he was head of the Bank of England. And when he was head of the Bank of England, he was very much, hey, I'm not a politician. I don't have any political views or ambitions. I'm just an economics expert. And as a neutral, apolitical economics expert, I'm telling you, Britain, don't do Brexit. don't leave the European Union. Because purely speaking, with my expertise, you're going to be way better off if you're part of the European Union, and it's going to be economic Armageddon if you leave the European Union. Now, there has not been economic Armageddon, and Mark Carney seems to have suffered no consequences for getting that forecast wrong, and then also not being a neutral, non-political expert, but now actually going into politics and leading a political party. I mean, it exposes, I think, broader issues about the dangers of rule by non-political experts, because really they do have strong political stances, but also how pro-EU Mark Carney is. And Canada and the EU already have a free trade deal. So this paves the way for a Canada that is moving away from the United States very quickly and instead aligning itself with the EU.
Yeah, well, and at one point in Carney's career, he actually ran the Financial Stability Board. He succeeded Mario Draghi in that institution, who's another central banker who's been used by EU elites before to come in and form a technocratic government, in his case in Italy, when they didn't vote the way they wanted them to. So you can definitely see some similarities there. But Mark Carney, a couple of the time, his World Economic Forum appearances, he's really even identified himself not as a Canadian, but as a European. And so I think he's definitely got strong connections with the European Union and trying to move Canada in that direction. He gave a speech recently where he said that the special relationship between the U.S. and Canada is over. And I think he definitely seems to be moving Canada more towards close alliance with the European Union, which really gives that power, which we've identified many times before as a modern revival of the Holy Roman Empire, a foothold in the northern part of North America, which is another really interesting prophetic angle here. One of the verses I brought with me, getting back to our previous point, in Isaiah 9, verse 21, it's an end-time prophecy talking about saying that Manasseh shall devour Ephraim, and Ephraim Manasseh, together they shall be against Judah. Talking about a time when Ephraim and Manasseh and Israel are all against each other. So something that's prophesied, something we're seeing happen before our eyes, that's a big change, because for most of the past 70, 80 years, there's a lot of people who have talked about what they call the special relationship between Britain and America, or between the British Commonwealth and America. That's actually a phrase, special relationship, that Winston Churchill coined in 1946. That was a new political development. He used it to kind of describe this close alliance America and the British Empire had in World War II that he wanted to continue. Because now it's easy to take it for granted that there's a special relationship between America and Britain that has existed throughout most of the 20th century. It wasn't necessarily that way in the 19th century, and definitely not in the 18th century. I mean, you started out with the Revolutionary War and then the War of 1812. By the time of the Civil War, Britain wasn't involved in that, but they were very supportive of the Confederacy, just on the logic that it weakens a potential rival across the Atlantic.
And that divided Britain as well as America, I think. There were some that supervised with the South. There's also, I think there's a statue in Birmingham just down the road from us of Abraham Lincoln, because of the letter that he wrote to the mill workers of Birmingham, because they supported the North, even though it was in their economic interest to align with the South. So I think it was kind of almost a class division. Upper class tended to try and back the South because of divide and rule, but there was a mass, more lower class support for the North. But I mean, that's kind of it's just interesting that Civil War played into divisions within British society as well as American society.
Yeah, I guess the same would have been true with the Revolutionary War, with,
right? Absolutely,
Edmund Burke, is that you had your supporters as well. But the point being that for about the first half of American history, it's like kind of like your alliance with the Ephraimite nations was controversial on both sides. And then since World War II, you've had this special relationship where it's kind of just been taken for granted that America and Britain are allies. Bible prophecies like Isaiah 9, verse 21, definitely indicates that by the time just preceding Christ's return, that special relationship is not going to be a very functioning special relationship. There's going to be more division between them. And I think we are starting to see the beginning of that, even with this Canadian election, with Mark Carney explicitly saying that he's like, this relationship between America and Canada as it's existed for the past 70 years is over. And publicly advocating that Canada needs to draw closer to the European Union to form a new special relationship between Canada and Europe instead of between Canada and the United States.
I should mention, I just double checked, it's Manchester where the Lincoln statue is, not Birmingham. Not massively important, but at least we can set the record straight. But certainly that division is a curse and an open door for Europe to be able to come into North America. What other stories did you have on your rundown for the English-speaking world this week?
Yeah, a couple other stories here. We've got some big economic news coming out today. Donald Trump is releasing his budget. He hasn't released it at the time of recording, but it looks like there's going to be a huge spike in defense spending, hiking the defense spending above $1 trillion for the first time in U.S. history. A pretty sizable spike in tariff revenue, with the U.S. collecting about $15 billion a month. So the highest levels of tariff revenue and like absolute dollar amounts in American history. And then quite a bit of spending cuts towards non-defense discretionary, maybe 170 billion in non-discretionary. I'm sure I'll have more to say next week on whether this helps the budget deficit or not. The reports coming out seem like it could actually be a small step in the right direction, even with the defense spending increases, actually bringing our budget deficit down lower, but definitely not a big enough cut in the budget deficit to lower our debt to GDP ratio, which is a problem. Elon Musk, actually, in another related story, came out this week saying that he's been disappointed at the progress Doge has made, but giving maybe a little sliver of hope, saying that he thinks that Doge isn't going away anytime soon. Originally, he was talking about, we're going to cut $2 trillion from the annual budget and dissolve Doge on July 4th, 2026 for the 250th anniversary of the United States to present the American people with a smaller, leaner government as their anniversary gift. Now he's like, well, we haven't been nearly as successful as I hoped towards that goal. He said, but I do think Doge is going to stick around till the end of Trump's term. So he's like, we may not hit the goals I put for July 4th, 2026, but he's like said, I do think that we are going to at least continue to try to make small but steady progress until at least Donald Trump leaves office.
I'll tag in one story quickly, just here in the UK. I mean, we've been talking about Canada elections. We've had local elections yesterday, and everything is being counted kind of as I speak. But it's been quite a remarkable shift towards Nigel Farage and reform. And I think this is the first time that Nigel Farage looks like a likely next prime minister, and that not being some kind of crazy, imaginative, kind of a scenario. Like his party has been doing incredibly well. They did very well for an upstart party in the general election last year. Now they're very quickly sweeping across the board. So there was one by-election, one MP seat that was up for grabs with this round of voting. The previous MP had been forced to stand down, I think, for criminal misconduct. And Farage's Reform Party won that by just 6 seats, the slimmest margin of victory ever for a reform. I mean, ever for a by-election, but a victory nonetheless. They've won at least one of the mayoral votes, and I think there's another one that's looking very close. So I think there's about 6 mayoral votes going on right now. Then it's seats in local councils, and across the UK so far, the Reform have won 462 seats. The Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats are next with 188, Conservatives 176. So just in local councils, they're storming across the UK. I think there's 4 different local councils they've now taken control of so far. So, I mean, these are elections that, for those of you living outside the UK, they don't really affect you. There's not really much of a reason to care about it. The point is that if Nigel Farage and Reform do this well in a national election, they will win by a landslide. So they're definitely looking more and more. If there's an upstart party, the biggest reason to not vote for them is a vote is a waste. Because if they don't have a chance of winning, then you're throwing your vote away. And you can get, sometimes a lot of people like them, but they'll vote for one of the established parties because only one of the established parties can win. Now, though, that taboo is broken. They've proven that they can win. So this could be transformational for British politics. I think we'll have to stay and watch this story to see, how does Britain's politics tie in with what we're seeing in the United States, the division with Canada. And Mr. Fleury has opened the door, said, well, maybe we've got the resurgence in America under Donald Trump. Maybe we'll see something similar under Britain. Now, another general election is still 4 years away. So based on just what we can see, there's not a clear path for things turning around tomorrow. But I think certainly potentially a dramatic turning point here in the UK that's worth noting.
Yeah, that would be pretty. Because I've always liked, I've always liked Nigel Farage. I've actually haven't kept much tabs on him recently because, like I said, he's got good ideas. But like you are right, is he presents it in a funny way. So if he's trying to take on a little bit more gravitas, while still keeping the substance of his policies, I think he could do well.
And to be fair, we did have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, so perhaps gravitas is not a requirement for. I mean, he has a certain form of gravitas. Anyway, thank you very much for that, Andrew. I wanted to introduce the next section with a clip from a Key of David program.
I want to read you a document from Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in 1945. That's over 70 years ago. It is our inflexible purpose to destroy German militarism and Nazism and to ensure Germany will never again be able to disturb the peace of the world. They had done that repeatedly. We are determined to disarm and disband all German armed forces, break up for all time the German General Staff that has repeatedly contrived the resurgence of German militarism, remove or destroy all German military equipment, eliminate or control all German industry that could be used for military production. Well, how about that? That is after they defeated Germany in World War II. Did you know that Germany is ranks third in exporting military weapons today? Third in the world, little Germany, compared to these other great nations. Amazing. But that is the truth. And so, we didn't do what we said we were going to do. And Bible prophecy says some very bad things about what Germany is going to do in the near future.
Germany's military rise is something Mr. Fleury has kept very close track of. It's a key Bible prophecy. And as he points out in that Key of David clip, Germany has had a strong military industry for many, many years. They're high on the league table for military exports. For a while, they were in 3rd place. They're back in 5th place at the moment, but they have a very strong defense industry. An important statistic published this week showed massive growth in German military power that has already happened. So total global military spending reached $2.7 trillion last year in 2024, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI. They published their statistics on Monday, showing the highest year-on-year rise in defense spending since the end of the Cold War. It's jumped 9.4% global defense spending from 2023 to 2024, and the largest increases are in the Middle East and in Europe. Everybody is spending more, but one country really stands out for how quickly they're jumping up the league table of military spenders, and that is Germany. So like I said, global military spending rose by about 10%. Europe's rose by 19%. So Europe is boosting their military spending about twice as fast as the rest of the world is. Germany's rose by 28%. They're boosting their military spending by about 3 times what the world is doing. Japan raised its defense spending by 21%. Poland and Sweden, 31%, 34%. So those are other notable spenders. But in a single year, Germany went from the world's 7th largest military spender to the 4th largest military spender. They're now right behind the US, China, Russia. They're kind of at superpower levels in terms of military spending. Russia is engaged in full-scale war, and Germany is kind of catching up to them in terms of military spending. One of the researchers with SIPRI said, for the first time since reunification, Germany became the biggest military spender in Western Europe, which was due to the 100 billion euro special defense fund announced in 2022. And we've talked a lot on this show about how Germany has changed its constitution to exempt defense spending from its debt limit, so it can borrow unlimited amounts of money to boost its defense spending. I think it's important to note that these figures are looking backwards. They refer to before this change. So even before Germany changed its constitution to enable more military spending, it was already in the number 4 spot. Now, of course, Germany is part of the European Union as well. And this European Union is drawing closer together. Combined, you put their military spending together and they are a real force to be reckoned with. And again, everybody's increasing defense spending within the European Union. Now, there is inefficiency there. There is duplicated efforts when you have 27 different militaries instead of one single military. Some of that is changing. Dramatically more capable military than Russia, for example. And this European dynamic is important because France used to aspire to be the military leader of Europe, because France was the biggest spender in Europe. And so whenever there was any kind of combined European military mission, France would kind of automatically take the lead because they were the ones doing most of the funding. Now it's Germany that's in that spot. They are very solidly the biggest military spender in Europe now, and they're just taking up even further. And France has got so much debt, it's much harder for them to boost their military spending. So you'll also, not only are you seeing Germany become a more militaristic power, you're going to see them take much more lead in Europe, and especially on the military. And I want to play another clip. This is from Herbert W. Armstrong, I think from his radio show, and talks a lot about the importance of Germany. This is a show we played a lot on the Trumpet Daily because it's quite an eloquent statement of Germany's importance to Europe.
And some of us, my friends, know not only what we see when we're over there, but we know also what is prophesied. And we know what is prophesied to rise up in Europe. And we know which is the one and the only nation in Europe that is capable of dominating, and which is the economic and the industrial heart of all Europe, without which there could be no stability and strength. A human body cannot live without its heart. And the economic and the military body that is to rise up and to restore the Roman Empire, the thing that we least suspect here in the United States, it cannot rise up without its heart. And its heart is in Germany.
So this is a revival at the military heart of Europe. And this was also a footnote for most people's news this week. This was not a big story. Partly because it's not surprising. We've seen and we've had reported Germany's increases in military spending. But a big part of the reason is nobody's particularly concerned that Germany now has the number 4 spot. This is what Mr. Flurry wrote in the latest Trumpet print edition. Americans and others whose grandfathers fought and died from German weaponry are now cheering this development. Again, talking about Germany's military revival. They're oblivious to the feelings of revenge simmering deep down in many Germans. And he says that Winston Churchill saw German car manufacturers and other industries shift towards arms production. We're now seeing the same thing. The country's autobahn is more than a symbol of speed. It is part of its strategic military mobilization plans. Investments are made to turn the whole German landscape into a field ready for battle. Germany is repeating the actions of the 1930s, yet no one is alarmed. That's absolutely true. Mr. Fleury's article is called Heed the Watchman. And you can go and look that up and see the prophetic warning, but the historic warning, the warning from history as well, behind what Germany is doing. Again, this is a keynote prophecy from Herbert W. Armstrong. This is something then that Mr. Fleury has been talking about for years and years, and you're watching it happen. This is Bible prophecy being fulfilled before your eyes. The rise of Germany as a military power. We were talking about the beast power on Wednesday's show with our on location in Brussels. And we were talking about Revelation 13 that says, well, who is likened to the beast? Who shall make war with him? The whole world sees this beast as an invincible war-making power. And we're seeing the dramatic turnaround that is paving the way for that to happen. So keep watching for that. And that's a turnaround that is only going to increase. Mr. Fleury had another article this week titled, Europe Needs Someone Greater Than a German Chancellor, talking about how you're going to get a European strongman, a German strongman leading at the European level, coming very soon. And Mr. Fleury said before that once you see this strongman in charge, that's really going to turbocharge the military development. That's when you're going to see a lot of this military spending really expand on an even higher level. And so when you get that strongman in charge, so much has already been said, has already been done. And you're going to see Germany accelerate even more quickly as a major military power. So keep watching this prophecy, but it's already a remarkable fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And in terms of, on the subject of keeping on watching German politics, the next German government overcame one of its last hurdles this week, where the Social Democratic Party, the left-wing party, Germany's equivalent of the Democrats, their rank-and-file membership signed off on the coalition agreement. So that's one of the final hurdles before this government can take office. So they're all set to take office on May 6th. Now, the Bundestag, the German parliament, still has to vote them in. There's a small chance that you might get some rebels, a handful of rebels, try to block it from both parties, kind of going rogue. That's pretty unlikely, though, and we're overwhelmingly most likely to see Friedrich Merz take office on May 6th, and keep watching German politics for that strongman to rise. I mean, that is another critical trend in turning around Germany. And we have a book, A Strong German Leader is Imminent, that talks about the rise of this strongman, that talks about the military turnaround, that talks about the rapid transformation that the Bible prophesies is coming to Germany, and the rapid transformation that is happening already. So that's a great book to go to study, to understand what the Bible says will happen and is happening to Germany. So you can watch see how Bible prophecy has already been fulfilled, and then watch it fulfilled before your eyes. While talking of events next week, another bit of news we got is that the conclave for the election of the new Pope will begin on May 7th. So that's when the cardinals will start their voting. And we also saw the funeral last week for Pope Francis, where you had about 250,000 people gather in Rome to watch him laid to rest, or 250,000 at the funeral itself, another 150,000 lining the route, a total of 400,000 mourners. You had 50 heads of state, 12 reigning monarchs, 15 heads of government gather for this funeral. And I think I read to you a few quotes last week from Mr. Fleury's article in 2005, The Dark Side of the Pope's Funeral, where he talked about the way that all of this symbolism captures the attention of the world. He said America and Britain have been mesmerized by the Pope's funeral. And he talks about the powerful spotlight that these kind of events put on Europe's Catholic heritage. He said people need a more specific focus to stir their imaginations, and they are getting that. And these events do stir European imaginations and remind them of the role that the Catholic Church has played in Europe, and will play a decisive event or a decisive role in Europe, re-embracing its Catholic heritage to come together as a superpower. And again, that's something we talked about on Wednesday's Show Us On Location special. But I think another takeaway from the Pope's funeral is to compare it with the last sitting Pope that died, which was in office, which was John Paul II. I mean, we had Pope Benedict, but his funeral was a much smaller affair because he'd already resigned as Pope before he died. But for Pope John Paul II, you had 1 million people come to see his body within the first 24 hours. For Pope Francis, it was 50,000. And it's still impressive, but nowhere near the attention of John Paul II. You had 4 to 5 million people show up for the funeral, much less than the 400,000 for Pope Francis. I think most people around the world, most of you watching this, probably have seen clips and images of Pope Francis's funeral, but I doubt those tuning into it to watch it live reached the 2 billion that did for Pope John Paul II. And then even long after he was dead, when Pope John Paul II was beatified in 2011, 1.5 million people attended that mass. What has happened to the Catholic popularity, especially as Pope Francis, when he came into office, he was the Time Person of the Year. The media was gushing about the Francis effect. Time magazine wrote, what makes this Pope so important is the speed with which he's captured the imaginations of millions who'd given up on hoping for the church at all. He was meant to be this new great hope that was going to take the Catholic Church to new heights of popularity. I mean, what happened to that? I think part of that is that Pope Francis's boost in enthusiasm and popularity for the church comes from Latin America, comes from outside of Europe, where it's harder to travel to the funeral. But I think part of it then also points to the fact that the Catholic Church is having a bit of a crisis within Europe, a crisis of apathy, of people being disillusioned with the Catholic Church. I mean, various different parts of this funeral did remind people of different scandals the Catholic Church has had over the years. Just even since then, every few days you have some headline about a controversial person being in the Vatican or deciding he's not going to attend the College of Cardinals, and reminding people of some of these sexual abuse cases that you've had from the Catholic Church. But really, I think this points to the fact that the Catholic Church does have a major problem on its hands in Europe. But they're not going to quietly sit by and go into decline. Watch for the next Pope to really aggressively attack that, confront that, and try and revive the Catholic Church's reputation and power, especially in Europe. I mean, this is another opportunity to watch Bible prophecy fulfilled in the January-February issue of the Royal Vision magazine, which is a kind of a more Christian living focused magazine that we have. I think we're working on making that a little easier to sign up for, but if you would like a subscription, shoot us an email at trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com and we can make sure you get that. But he talked about how, well, Bible prophecy says the Catholic Church is going to revive in Europe. And you look at various different measures, and really all the indications say it's declining in Europe. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. This is another opportunity to watch for a turnaround. Watch for Bible prophecy to be proved true when so many of the other indicators point in the other direction. So watch for that. But also, I think, watch for a papacy that changes direction after the next conclave. In our latest Trumpet print magazine, again, we had that article from Mr. Fleury written before the Pope died, "A New Era Requires a New Pope," where he says, in some ways, Pope Francis has prepared the Catholic Church to fulfill some of these prophecies, some Bible prophecies. But he said, I believe the changing times we live in will require a different Pope. Pope Francis doesn't quite fit the picture. And I think more and more are reaching that same conclusion within the Vatican. Francis Rocca, he's a longtime Vatican watcher. He said advocacy for migrants, for the environment, are not winning politically, even in his native Argentina, in the United States, and in Europe. Right-wing populism is on the rise. And he says, well, there might be a sense that maybe this isn't a vote for continuity, that we need somebody that cardinals are starting to conclude. We need somebody different for Pope Francis. So watch for a new Pope to take some important departures from Pope Francis, and a Pope that's going to be a strong unifier of Europe, and one that's going to really unify Europe to confront things like migration and radical Islam. On that subject of confronting migration and radical Islam, just another quick story from today. The Alternative for Deutschland has been officially designated as a right-wing extremist party by the German government and the Office for Protection of the Constitution, the Domestic Intelligence Agency. They put out a statement saying the ethnicity and ancestry-based conception of the people that predominates within the party is not compatible with the free democratic order. Now, this is the party that is, by a lot of polls, the most popular political party in Germany. And the government is labeling it a far-right extremist party. And I think in a lot of ways they're right. Like, we've labeled this on this show a far-right extremist party. When you look at the view that many of their leaders, especially in Eastern Germany, have about the Nazis, and what they've said about the Nazis, about we need to be proud of some of the things that Nazi soldiers did. We need to be proud of the achievements of our soldiers in World War I and World War II. We need to tear down Holocaust memorials. We need to stop memorializing that history and be proud of ourselves and proud of these dark periods even. Then yes, there is definitely neo-Nazism there. However, if you look at the reasoning of this domestic intelligence agency, they're talking about it being on migration, and they're trying to basically criminalize or put beyond the pale anyone that would disagree with mass migration policies. And again, that is dangerous. They're trying to ignore and even criminalize real, genuine concerns about problems caused by migration in Germany, in Europe, everywhere. We're all dealing with this all around the world. And you try to criminalize that and make it so that people cannot complain, cannot vote for a party that's going to overturn migration, and it will explode. People are not going to stand for this forever. And if you don't allow any democracy, any voting to stand in the way of mass migration, democracy itself is going to get swept away. And so this is a story that will play into the rise of a German strongman, as you have a German state just try to clamp down on democracy and say, well, views held by a very substantial number of Germans are extremist. This won't end well, and this is going to play a role in the rise of this German strongman. And a final story that I think is absolutely fascinating from this week is the power outage in almost the entirety of the Iberian Peninsula. Lights out across all of Spain and Portugal. I believe they stayed on in Gibraltar. I have to point that out as a point of patriotic pride. But you had a very severe disruption. Your public transport shutting down, businesses, banks, ATMs, supermarkets, people being trapped in lifts or elevators. They estimate the losses. Spain estimates that its losses were 1.6 billion euros. If you think about, say, an ice cream shop and restaurants and organizations with perishable goods, they face significant losses. You had a state of emergency declared, 30,000 police deployed just to manage traffic. You even had people dying. You had things like carbon monoxide poisoning from generator use, but other issues from power being out. And it does show how fragile this modern world is. What I find astounding is you have power going out to two modern Western countries, and the response is like, okay, why did it happen? It's like, well, we don't know. Like, how is everything so complicated that we can have power go out to two countries and days later, I don't know what caused it. I mean, that is, I think, a bit of a wake-up call to how fragile our Western civilization is. Now, one part of this as well is definitely green policies and green energy policies, electrifying everything and then shifting to renewable energy that's much more variable, with solar energy, wind energy that's going to depend on the weather. Both of these things make your energy infrastructure more fragile. How much that played into what happened in Spain and Portugal, I don't think we know yet, but that fact is certainly true. But this is a powerful reminder of how fragile modern life is and how much we just take for granted. And I think it helps bring to life several Bible prophecies about what is coming to Britain, to America, to the whole world as we move into some of these crises and God's punishment on mankind to get them to wake up. I mean, you're going to see blackouts like this, and you're going to see them last longer. And you'll see worse and worse outcomes of this. And we're so secure, and we think we're so on top of everything, and it just really doesn't take much to bring all of our civilization crashing down. And we can be so arrogant as individuals, as mankind, and God is going to humble us and say, your civilization that you've built, it is not so great, it is not so indestructible as you think, and you really need to listen to some truths from the Bible, not relying and leaning on your own understanding. So we're going to see that more and more. Well, one way that you can get these kind of power outages and things like that is natural disasters. And we talk about natural disasters a fair bit on this show. One region we haven't tended to talk about natural disasters in, because they're often bigger man-made disasters going on, is the Middle East. But this week we've had a disaster that has natural components and man-made components hitting Israel as it struggles to deal with massive wildfires. We'll hear more about this from our Middle East correspondent, Mihailo Zekic.
Yes, so on Wednesday and Thursday, Israel faced its worst ever wildfires on record. The government declared a national emergency. There were 700,000 people evacuated, mainly around the Jerusalem area. 5,000 acres approximately were burnt down, and it coincided with a couple of really important holidays. There's Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism, as well as immediately after that, it's Independence Day, the celebration of establishing the State of Israel. So far, to our knowledge, nobody has died yet, so could have been a lot worse. The fires as of late Thursday have been put out. Help from, I believe, Croatia and Italy and some of the Mediterranean countries came in to help Israel put it out. But the question remains as to what actually caused these fires, or rather, who caused these fires. On Wednesday, Israeli police arrested 3 on charges of arson. This was reportedly in collaboration with Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence agency. The very fact that Shin Bet was involved in this alone suggests that this was not just, say, some teenagers being a bit reckless and launching some fireworks somewhere. Shin Bet wouldn't get involved unless if it was terrorism. And later, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said 18 people were detained. The Israeli police have disputed that number. But overall, it looks like somebody, whether coordinated together or just through scattered people doing their own thing, basically started these fires to basically end lives, which thankfully didn't happen. And of course, terrorism, that is implying, of course, we don't really know too many details. We know at least one man is an Arab resident of eastern Jerusalem. It would more or less, we could assume it's Islamic terrorism at this point. And this also follows with a barrage of posts in social media and Arabic language media for people saying to go out and start fires in Israel. And again, this coinciding with Israel's National Day as it's fighting the war in Gaza suggests that even if it wasn't necessarily like coordinated with everybody in on it, there was certainly prior planning for people to do some damage on this. Now, we talk about on this program quite often Israel's war on terrorism and everything it's doing in Gaza, everything it's doing with Hezbollah in Lebanon, everything it's doing in the West Bank. In this case, the very fact that the Israeli civil police were involved in this and the areas implicated suggests that these problems with terrorism, these problems with Islamic extremism, they're also starting to spread among Israel's indigenous Arab population itself. I mean, Israel, it just recently reached 10 million in population. About 20% of that is Arab. Obviously, the people living within Israel itself, they've had decades to adjust to Israeli society. Many of them, most of them are assimilated, but a significant portion of them do side with Hamas, with these other terror groups, and are willing to heed the call when it's made to start doing some damage. And this reminded me of a prophecy our editor-in-chief, Mr. Fleury, has gone to multiple times over and over again. Hosea 5:13, I could read it out, quote, "When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb. Yet could he not heal you, nor cure you of your wound," end quote. And I could look at the Hebrew in there. It specifies that both Ephraim, or modern England, and Judah, the state of Israel today, the Jews, go to Assyria, go to Germany to sort things out. And the implication is that Israel has this problem, this wound, that it needs international attention for. What is this wound? Well, if you look at the original Hebrew meaning through concordances and other help, you could see that that word wound actually means a remedy, a bandaging up of a wound. And this is what Mr. Fleury writes in Jerusalem in Prophecy, quote, "In other words, the remedy is the wound." Further down, in the booklet, he identifies what this wound is, quote, "is the peace pact with the Arabs, the Israeli wound that God refers to in Hosea 5:13. There would have been no peace pact if Judah would have trusted in God instead of men. The word wound doesn't necessarily itself refer to some violent act, but it will undoubtedly lead to violence," end quote. Now, when Mr. Fleury wrote that, when he quotes this, he usually refers it to the peace process with the Palestinians in the West Bank, with Gaza. But you can see here that there's even an internal wound inside Israel proper itself, inside the territory that most people will regard as undisputably Israeli, that belongs to the sovereign state of Israel, that implicates citizens, born citizens potentially, of the state of Israel. And we'll keep watching this as tensions with Israel, not just with its Arab neighbors, but also the Arab citizens of Israel itself, continue to grow. But this looks like to be a much more internal, visceral wound, a systemic problem within society itself that Israel is one way or another going to have to confront. One other story before we move on from the Middle East, just a quick update on the Iranian nuclear negotiations. They were supposed to be scheduled again for tomorrow, this Saturday. They have since been postponed. According to the Iranians, this is for logistical and technical reasons. We don't know the whole details. They're not completely called off yet. U.S. President Donald Trump, for his part, has threatened sanctions on anybody, any third party that buys Iranian oil in the meantime. He's made a lot of threats like this before and hasn't carried them out, so we'll see what happens there. There has been a bit of a sticking point between Iran wanting to have the capacity to enrich its own uranium and the U.S. saying, okay, you can have a nuclear program for energy purposes, but you have to get the enriched uranium from somewhere else because we don't trust you to do it yourself. This probably has something to do with that, but we'll keep tabs on that as that story progresses.
Thank you for that, Mihailo. Well, one of the most eye-catching news stories of the week has been this tension between India and Pakistan, because that always brings with it the prospect of nuclear war. It's always disturbing when you have that kind of saber rattling. So just to give us a quick update of what has been going on here, we'll go to our Asia correspondent, Jeremiah Jacques.
Yes, that's right. India and Pakistan, these are two massive countries, and they are very different religiously. India, of course, is a Hindu majority nation, and then Pakistan is overwhelmingly Islamic. So that's a major difference. But what India and Pakistan have in common, as you said there in the introduction, is that they are both nuclear armed. They're both members of the very exclusive nuclear club. Only 9 nations on Earth are in that exclusive club with nuclear weapons. And tensions between these two are suddenly soaring once again. This started last Tuesday when terrorists killed 26 people, mainly Hindus, in Kashmir, India. And the Indian authorities suspect that the terrorists were affiliated with Pakistan and possibly even supported by the Pakistani military. So it's an extremely fraught situation right now. India has closed its airspace to Pakistan. Pakistan has canceled visas for most Indians. And right now there's even talk of India possibly launching military strikes on Pakistan in the next few days. And so these kinds of tensions would be worrying enough with any two nations. But when you're talking about two nuclear-armed countries, that makes it just exponentially more alarming. That means that the stakes are just in the stratosphere. And at the trumpet, we don't expect this to trigger the next world war, as some analysts do right now. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't explode into a very serious conflict and become yet another flashpoint in a world that's becoming more and more unstable, really by the month.
So that's perhaps the most eye-catching story from Asia. But you've got something else with a bit of a deeper connection to Bible prophecy that you wanted to bring us as your main story today.
That's right, yes. And that is that China is working hard to court Europe, just doing everything it can to draw nearer to Europe in trade, as it tries to limit the damage to its economy from the trade war with America. So the trade war between the US and China, it is in full force. America's import duties on Chinese products are now as high as 145%. So that means that Chinese products now cost 2.5 times more to sell to Americans than they did. And then China has answered that by placing 125% tariffs on US products. So these are very serious tariff rates, and they are already sharply dropping the flow of Chinese goods into American ports. The Flexport supply chain manager company, yesterday they said that container bookings from China to the US are down by 60%. So very significant numbers there. And we have to remember that China's economy is heavily dependent on exports. Great numbers of the Chinese people, the vast majority really, still have extremely low incomes, and they're not really able to afford very much of what their nation produces. So China depends on selling its products to people of other countries, especially wealthier countries, for a lot of its products. And so now that Americans are buying much less, China's looking to sell more to other markets. And this week we've seen that Europe is really becoming a huge focal point for the Chinese. The Chinese hope that they can sell a lot more to the Europeans, and that way the losses will be kind of offset from what they're no longer selling in America. So the Chinese leadership are trying to just improve their relationship with Europe. And on Wednesday, we saw China lift sanctions on 5 members of the European Parliament. So a few years back, these Europeans had put sanctions on China because of its human rights abuses with the Uyghurs of China. So the Chinese leadership, of course, didn't like those sanctions and had sanctioned these Europeans who were behind them. But now the Chinese are saying, you know what, forget about that. Let's just move past it. And that way we can begin trading with Europe more than we have been. So China lifted those sanctions on the Europeans, and this is only the most recent step that China has really taken to cozy up more to Europe. Back in February, the Chinese waged a whole charm offensive on Europe and actually succeeded at that time in getting EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to agree that China and Europe need to deepen trade in order to survive the trade pressure from America. And then in March, China focused specifically on Portugal, just working to open up a new chapter in China-EU trade and relations. And then last month, China held meetings with a whole cast of Europeans, just trying to convince them that China is kind of the new leader of international trade and the new safeguard of the global trading system. So you really see in all these measures that the Chinese are working hard to woo the Europeans and convince them to boost trade with China. So far, though, we have not seen China make any real changes in its toxic trade practices. And Europe suffers as a result of those practices, just like America does. So the Chinese efforts are not yet really changing the dynamic in a significant way, but the Chinese are pushing hard. Their economy is struggling, and they don't want to cave into the US, and they know that they need to find new buyers for their products. So they're pushing hard, and maybe there will be some meaningful reforms from the Chinese soon in their trade with Europe. So we'll just have to wait and see there. But we can be sure that sooner or later, China and Europe will overcome their differences, at least temporarily, and form a deep trade alliance. We can be sure about that because biblical prophecy tells us that we should expect it. You can read all about that in Isaiah 23. That chapter is all about an alliance of nations that will soon come together, and China and Europe are 2 of the key powers in that bloc. And the scriptures make clear that this is an unambiguously anti-American trade alliance. Its whole purpose is to work against the US and even to eventually freeze the US out of world trade. So it's a sobering reality there, a very alarming goal that the alliance here will be working toward. And I think that that makes it very significant right now to see China and Europe working together so much in trade, and not just working together in trade, but really doing so, with the Chinese at least, very much in an anti-American spirit. And we do have a booklet called Isaiah's End Time Vision. It's by Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry, and it has a detailed section all about these biblical prophecies. And it shows us what we should expect in the months and years ahead with China and Europe in the way they will unite against America. So if you'd like to understand all of that in the biblical context, I hope that you'll order your free copy of Isaiah's End Time Vision.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. We did get one of your kind of short rundown pieces at the start. Did you have any others to bring us?
Yes, just one other short story here, and it is that Russia and North Korea are well into construction on a new bridge that will link their two countries. This will actually be the first road link between Russia and North Korea. The Telegraph reported on this yesterday using satellite imagery to show that the construction is well underway. And this will be a notable milestone in Russia-North Korea relations. They've only ever had a rail linking them before this, but now there will be a highway as well. And of course, this comes as Russia and North Korea are drawing much closer militarily. North Korea has been a real lifesaver to the Russians, sending them millions of artillery shells for the war against Ukraine and missiles as well, and even thousands of North Korean soldiers. So it all shows that these two Asian nations are drawing closer and closer. And that's something that the Trumpet has been expecting, and we will keep on giving updates about it as Russia and North Korea continue to draw nearer.
Thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. That is all we have for you this week. Thank you very much to George Haddad, Isaac Lorenz, and Victor Granados for engineering and production. Thank you so much to you, the viewer, for joining us once again for our Week in Review. We'll be back on Wednesday for our midweek program. If you have any comments, any questions, feel free to get in touch at trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. All of the different pieces of literature that we mentioned, you can get on our website, thetrumpet.com as well. I'll just mention a strong German leader is imminent. The booklet that I mentioned in the Europe section, that's a great and pretty short booklet on what to expect next for Europe and for Germany. But we've got booklets on all of this different material, and we'll put a link to the show notes as well. So as I said, we'll be back on Wednesday. Until then, keep watching your world.